this morning, Gadi Taub released an interview with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, I'm reading it in subtitles because they're talking in Hebrew. And I've noticed a few things. I'm only going to ask you about one, which is that the Prime Minister says America stood with us initially. Then he talks about Biden's threat to cut off more than the 2,000 bombs, but plenty of things. And about what makes news the most in this interview, or anything at all?
I think that I did not see the interview travel very much in Israeli media, including, by the way, in pro-Netanyahu media. In other words, Channel 14 is a very pro-Netanyahu channel in Israel, and I didn't see it make dramatic headlines. Netanyahu made arguments that he's made before. I think his fundamental argument, he made it at the Knesset, and that video was broadcast in many places, and he made it in various interviews, is that he won the war. The war seems to be going very favorably for Israel. Iran seems to be on its back feet. Gaza is not a victory. Hamas still exists in Gaza, but Gaza really can't rebuild with Hamas in charge. And that, in a sense, and the kind of war Hamas built Gaza really to be for 17 years, the kind of war Hamas planned, in which civilian deaths is Hamas's strategy for survival, that is basically an Israeli victory. And Netanyahu is trying to ride this Israeli perception that things have shifted in the last 5 months in the Middle East, and Israel really has the upper hand going forward, and to say, I did this, and if the opposition was in charge, then, a lot of Israelis are very angry with him, right-wing Israelis. He was the prime minister on October 7. He was the man whose strategy led us to containment of deterrence, led us to October 7, and now he's saying, I'm also the guy who turned us around. And so that was what that interview, I think, was for. It was to the base, and it's a legitimate interview. It's an interesting interview. I'll just say one little piece of criticism that I think is really fundamental. He gives very few interviews with the press, and he gives no interviews at all with the press that doesn't favor him. I mean, he's gone months at a time with not a single media interview in the middle of a war. And so it was part of Netanyahu's ongoing campaign to survive October 7, essentially, politically.
Were you surprised at all? Because this is what surprised me as an American watching the war, that the United States pressure grew so dramatically right down to that meeting that the Prime Minister recounts in the Prime Minister's office when Biden tells him to stop and not to go into Rafah. I mean, is any of that news to you? Because if it is, it's news to me, and I don't know that the American media covered it.
I didn't know about a specific moment when Biden made that specific statement, but the Biden administration for 4 months, roughly between February and May of last year, said that openly. In other words, it said, you will not go into Rafah. Remember Kamala Harris as vice president saying, I've seen the maps, it's not doable, right? I don't know what maps she saw. The Biden administration said things about not going into Rafah that were patently ridiculous. There were, it would take 4 months, they said, to move the civilians out in order to fight Hamas. Well, it ended up taking 12 days. I'm not sure the Biden administration really had a good sense. Literally, the National Security Council under Biden had a good sense of the size of Gaza. I always imagined that with the kinds of statements they made about Rafah, about Gaza, it always seemed as though on one wall in the National Security Council briefing room, they have a map of Ukraine, and on another, they have a map of Gaza, and the maps are the same size, so they kind of assumed Gaza is this enormous place. Gaza is a 25-kilometer territory, and maneuverability in Gaza is very easy. Anyway, I think Israel did fairly well in this war, better than could be expected. Not every airstrike was okay. Not every Israeli operation was successful. Civilians died. That was Hamas's fundamental strategy. Does that mean I think Israel's 100% okay? Absolutely not. But the Biden administration had an incoherent policy, not because it really believed Israel was behaving insanely in Gaza militarily, but because it was constantly with one eye on domestic politics. And it meant that President Biden told Israel not to win, which was a silly thing to say that dragged out everybody's suffering, including Gazan civilians.
In this brand new book, Fight, next time I'm talking to the authors, Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes, it reveals that President Biden lacked a lot of cognitive ability, at least in the last year of his presidency, probably in the last 2.5 years of his presidency. Have you heard anyone in Israel discuss that?
I think I'll put it real simple. I mean, you don't talk to the president much in foreign policy. You know, it's much more likely that senators dealing or members of Congress dealing with the federal budget would speak to the president than it is that Israeli defense ministers would interact directly, consistently with the president. So I have not heard that from Israeli officials.
It's pretty
but
shocking.
There's no reason you would think that.
Yeah, I get it.
It's
There's
not
no
that I
reason.
don't believe it.
Yeah, when you read it, when you get a chance, you'll be appalled. I was appalled.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.